fine, thank you.
Thanks. Rod, do you want to ask one or two before we break?
Yes. I just wonder if I can follow up on one or two points. You, I think, talking about the Crawford press conference, or quoting from the Prime Minister's press conference at Crawford, said, or had him say, all the options available will be considered. Now, can you recall from all of these meetings that were held on Iraq in 2001, 2002, what meetings the Prime Minister did hold to consider all of the strategic options with regard to Iraq and the likely consequences of each?
Look, how many meetings did the Prime Minister hold on Iraq? Dozens and dozens and dozens. If you was talking about sitting down, as it were, for a fundamental review of all policy, I would say that was happening on an ongoing basis. There were a number of really pretty big meetings with all the relevant ministers there and all the obvious people who would feed in advice to that process. So I think he and his colleagues were thinking about all the different strategic options all the time.
But what were those strategic options?
Well, you can when he talked there, post the Crawford meeting, about all the options being available, he's making. I go back to what I said in my previous answers about the running together, if you like, of a diplomatic and a military track and strategies aimed at ultimately leading to the disarmament of Saddam Hussein, which hopefully can be resolved diplomatically, but if they can't, then they're going to have to be resolved militarily.
Those are tactical options within a strategy. But were you not in a situation in which, since 1991, containment had prevented Iraq effectively from threatening its neighbours and from developing a nuclear weapon? Was that not an alternative strategic option?
Yeah,
was that looked at?
Yes, it was, and I think there were discussions of that. I think, again, you'd have to check against the record, but I think there was a specific discussion of that at that Crawford meeting as well. And there certainly was a discussion of it at the first meeting the Prime Minister had with President Bush shortly after President Bush's election. So that discussion was happening with other leaders as well, including with the French, about the extent to which the containment policy was or was not working. I think there was a sense that it wasn't sustainable for the long term. And I go back again to the point about this, what the JIC report quoted in the Butler report called this calculus of threat. I think that had changed the nature of that argument. But all of these different options, he'd have been aware of them, he'd be getting advised on them, and he'd be thinking about them all the time. So
there were times where, perhaps even in a slightly formal way, with cabinet ministers, the CDS and others, experts on the region, the Prime Minister would have sat down and said, here is the problem of Iraq, what are the possible ways, the possible strategies for dealing with it, and what's the downside of this, that and the other, as well as the upside?
He would.
Those sorts of discussions did take place.
They did.
And the Prime Minister, therefore, was pretty fully aware of the risks of going for a policy that might eventually lead to military action.
Yeah, he was. And he was also, I'd say he's somebody who I think always will weigh up very candidly upsides and downsides of a particular course of action. And none of these decisions were straightforward. None of them were ever black and white, 100% absolutely obvious, every step. You couldn't see any other way of handling it. There's always another way of handling these issues, but ultimately he has to take decisions.
Now, you said, talking about regime change, that the Prime Minister was not saying at Crawford that we now have a policy of regime change. But in his speech at the George Bush Presidential Library on the 7th of April, immediately after the Crawford meeting to which he referred, he said, talking in general terms about terrorism and WMD, not just about Iraq, if necessary, the action should be military, and again, if necessary and justified, it should involve regime change. And he then went on, as you said, to refer to 3 conflicts involving regime change: Milosevic, the Taliban, Sierra Leone, And a bit later on, he talked about Iraq. He said, I know some fear precipitate action. The moment for decision on how to act is not yet with us.
Yeah.
Now, that language on regime change, which Sir Christopher Mayer certainly regarded as a change of tack, you as a communications expert, would you not feel that that was a clear indication that the Prime Minister was giving to the American people, he was speaking in the United States, of his support for regime change and his readiness to apply it to Iraq?
I mean, I can't remember how the American media and public took that speech, but I don't see that as a significant shift. The speech that Christopher Mayer also referred to in 1998, we have a clear responsibility in the interest of long-term peace in the world to stop Saddam Hussein from defying the judgment of the world's community.
Sorry, could you slow that down?
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
Because of the stenographer.
Oh, sorry. We have a clear responsibility in the interest of long-term peace. Anyway, it's in the record already. You've got
it's in the record.
And the point about the speech to the George Bush Presidential Library, I don't think he's saying anything there that wasn't evident.
Well, if you stand up in the United States of America,
prior to Crawford,
you stand up in America in April 2002, when there's all this speculation about what's going to be done to Iraq.
yeah.
And you say, if necessary, the action should be military, and again, if necessary and justified, it should involve regime change.
Yeah.
How is the American audience going to interpret that?
Probably in the same way as they might have interpreted his speech in Chicago at a prior visit to the United States.
This is a different period. Iraq is top of the agenda
Yeah.
with the Middle East peace process and the Arab-Israel conflict. The Prime Minister says that. Is he signalling to the American people by saying that he supports regime change?
What he's signalling, and I think what he says, is that we are absolutely determined to disarm Saddam Hussein, and we're going to force him to confront his obligations to the United Nations and these resolutions that he's defied year in and year out. And we're going to try to do that diplomatically. If that cannot be done, and the only way left is through regime change, through military action, then the British government will support the American government. If they took that message, then the
British government will support the American government.
That is the message that he would have been putting over.
That is the message.
Right,
okay.
but that is, in my view, that was not a significant shift in his position. I accept that the context is clearly different because of where we were in the Iraq debate, the fact that he's in America, the fact that he's just seen George Bush. I accept all that.
Whether or not it's a significant shift, is this a line that he then repeated back in the United Kingdom? Is it a line that he used in Parliament at that time?
Well, look, if you're the Prime Minister on an issue like this, and with with modern communications as they are, anybody who is following this story will not have been unaware of what he said at the George Bush
No,
Presidential
that's not my question. My question is, did this continue to be his line when he was addressing audiences in the United Kingdom, including Parliament? I mean, you're his Director of Communications.
I thought that speech, and again, if you look at my my diaries, I think I point out that the bulk of that speech was written before we got there. There was a bit of fine-tuning. He knew what he was going to say. This was not a sort of...
That's not
George
the question
Bush's,
I asked. I mean, you've
read...
read...
It's part of the same... What I'm saying to you is the message, the overall approach was the same throughout. But there were obviously moments at which emphasis might change. There were key points at which there was a greater focus than at other points, and this may have been one of them. But I think it's entirely consistent with what the Prime Minister had been saying throughout.
You told us that you read all of his speeches while preparing for this inquiry. Did you find that he'd used that line again after he used it at Crawford when talking in the United Kingdom? That he'd used it in Parliament or in other speeches here?
I think he made clear when he talked about it, he kept saying, conflict is not inevitable, disarmament is. But he was clear throughout that if the diplomatic route did not lead to disarmament through Saddam facing up to his obligations under successive UN resolutions, then the military option was evident. So I really don't think that speech was... I mean, I know that you asked Jeremy Greenstock, did he receive specific instructions of a change, and he said no, he didn't. I don't think there was any reason for him so to have done.
Well,